Hello again. We're going into another lockdown in the UK, so plenty of time to do some more AETO. I wasn't quite sure how far I was going to get with this. Definitely wanted to take it into the initial invasion of Russia, but I've gone beyond that. Just about to start the March 42 turn, and I'm going to keep it going, I think, because I'm really quite enjoying it. It's sort of drawn me in. I've got no idea how it's going. Possibly you could say that the Germans are underperforming in Russia. More on that later. But I think the last video stopped as I was moving into the spring of 41 and discussing the opportunities of delaying the attack on Russia until the July turn, because then you get three sort of back-to-back guaranteed good weather turns, and there's not so much time for the Russians to be able to recover. Not sure about that now. May have just been my lack of optimal performance attacking Russia. You tend to find in a lot of these sort of strategic games, you think, well, I'm doing really well, I'm killing all these counters, but when you compare the progress to the historical front lines, you're actually quite a lot behind schedule. So, and it's also cost you at least one turn of good weather, because you could attack in the June with good weather, then you get a seasonal turn. Yes, that does allow the Russians to recover, but it's going to cost them, because you only get to replenish your 4 freebies if they're killed on Russian home soil, and typically you're destroying the front line in the Baltic states and in East Poland and Bessarabia. So I still don't know, which is a good thing, because if it was obvious, then where's the fun in that? But I would probably do it differently next time. But it probably depends how the Russians are deployed and how other things have gone. The other thing I noticed was that there was time to attack Yugoslavia after the fall of France, which I forgot to mention last time. It's nice to get that out of the way. It generates 12 or 14 more economic points a season, which is good, and there doesn't seem to be much of a downside. The only one I could see, may have missed it, it's a big rule book, was that there's a penalty in trying to get an early transit into the Axis miners of Bulgaria, Romania and Hungary. There's quite a good chance you'll be able to start to transit down through those countries in early 41 to get yourself optimally placed to go into Russia. Much harder if you've attacked Yugoslavia before you try and get transit permission. But those miners become Axis miners anyway in the spring, so you've still got time to rail some forces into position. Maybe not perfect, but then you've had the advantage of clearing out the Balkans. So I don't know. Interesting. So Russia attack went through. Lots of dead Russians, but they've come back and they're holding on quite well. We've just got through the first winter where the Germans get penalised. They lose steps each turn, and it's probably cost them something like 4 or 5 infantry steps and a couple of armoured steps. So, a bit expensive, I guess that's quite historical. And there's been a number of Russian counterattacks. Because the Russians successfully fought the Winter War, they get the benefit of a +1 DRM when they attack in the first winter against the Germans. And they've done that quite successfully. No blowout attacks. They can typically get about 2 to 1. So you can get, I think you can get a defender eliminated on an 8. It's a D8 system for the ground combat. So well, you're looking at 25% of a DE, which is pretty good really. But we've had none. But we have hurt quite a few German stacks which are looking for the first, or for the next season, looking for spring to try and rebuild. What else has happened? The Royal Navy finally got their, or more the Air Force, got their act together and managed to neutralise the threat of the German raiders in the North Atlantic. It was actually land-based Wellington bombers flying out of Canada that did the business in the end, but none were sunk. Gneisenau, Scharnhorst and Bismarck were all damaged. They all managed to return to port and they're all currently being repaired, so they will make an appearance again. But now that America has entered the war, as of December 41, there are of course many more naval assets around, so they're going to have a tougher audience when they reappear. Strategic bombing is taking place in a little bit in France. If you attack the conquered countries, you can bomb them less effectively than you could the German home cities. So there's been a bit of bombing on Le Havre, and I think Brest has had a few bombing raids, and there's been a few into Düsseldorf. And the first American bombers have just arrived. There's some B-17s I think now in England. So that's only going to get tougher for the Germans. But there was a massive stockpile of economic points at the end of I think going into the winter of 42. Something like 300 economic points, and I thought, wow, that's enormous. But actually most of them did get spent, because you get every winter turn you get the next year's force pool additions, and there's quite a few of those turned up. There was stuff that had to be repaired. There was an aircraft in reserve to replace the damaged, reminding them using the wartime replacement rule, so you can't just rebuild everything on I'm just using it for the air units, the wartime replacement. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's why I've got so many unspent points, because I'm not able to rebuild all these dead aircraft. Is there going to be a problem? But actually they've all been spent. The iron ore routes from Sweden have been interdicted by submarines. Both Russian and also Western Allied submarines are now sharing that role, trying to be thwarted by the land-based air that the Germans have got in. They've got some nice, I think they're Focke-Wulf 200s and some Junker 88s with decent range. So they're having an effect, but there are quite a few submarines that are fulfilling that role. And the U-boat war got pretty quiet in the end. There are about a dozen U-boats in these various convoy routes. The main area is the space where you can get the happy time bonus. But there was a very high concentration of convoy escorts in that zone, and it got to the point when it was, I think it was an 8 or less to damage, because it was good weather, so the escort carriers and the land-based air were all contributing quite a lot of points. So the U-boats thought it was time to use a bit of discretion and take some easier pickings. They can now enter the US coastal waters and are doing so. And there were 11 U-boats, or counters, I think. A counter's about between 3 and 5 vessels, I think, 3 and 5 submarines. 11 of those were added to the pool in 42, so they take, it's a 2-season delay, so they'll be around for the second half of the happy time in 42. The Mediterranean, Italy have not managed to throw off the shackles of being apathetic. They're still struggling to take Greece on their own. That's been an interesting little sideshow. I think with the better weather they may have a combined amphibious invasion to support the land forces driving down towards Athens, but they're struggling a bit, and they've now vacated Africa completely. In fact, the Allies declared war on Tunisia, and are moving up now and are about to attack, I think it's Bizerte, on the northern coast. The Italian Air Force were able to bomb some of the ports that they captured to deny them as air bases. So they've been trying to get land-based air there to cover the ports, but it's quite difficult because you've got to have the bases there to fly the planes there, and it's a bit of a catch-22. But that's good stuff. The Atlantic Wall is being built. In the game you can transfer some of the Maginot Line down to assist the coastal fortifications, and there have been some others added as well, so that the line's almost complete now, and there's a number of sort of second line Landwehr and Luftwaffe units that will be taking up position along the French, Belgium, Netherlands coastlines. Couple of points about the game. What was I going to say? I did actually make some notes today, which is must be a first. Yeah, a couple of house rules that I've been using. The first one is with strategic bombing. Now, the way that the air interception works is that in the game, if you fly bombers to a target hex, say if it's a land combat, you try and fly your bombers in, the other guy can then intercept with his fighters, you can counter-intercept them with your friendly fighters, either before they get to the target hex or actually in the target hex. And that seems to work for supporting land operations. But with strategic bombing, to me it just sits wrong that you plan a raid, say on Dusseldorf. You fly there with your bombers, and if the Germans do nothing, you clearly bomb with your full bombing strength. You may take a flak loss, but if the German decides to intercept, you can then at that time also decide to counter-intercept, which just feels weird. It's as if the bombers have crossed the channel, they're within sight of the target, say Dusseldorf, then they spot flights of enemy interceptors, at which point they call on the friendly fighters to come along and support them. I'm not sure how the timing actually stacks up with that particular scenario. So I'm just playing that if you are doing a strategic bombing raid, the bombers typically overfly a fighter base, they collect those en route, and they then head for the target. So you have your bombers and fighters arrive on the target, and then the Germans can decide to intercept or not. Just feels better. I'm sure when they planned the bombing campaign of Germany, and then say, well, we'll send our bombers in, and then when they get there, there are German fighters there, we'll teleport our fighters over to join the air battle. Just feels weird. Maybe I've missed something in the rules, but that's what the rule. I've read them a few times, and it works the same way as bombers supporting land combat. So, a bit odd. I'm also allowing you to combine half chits into one chit. Normally in the movement phase you can combine land units, but because of the wartime replacements, you often have a few half chits lying around, and typically the Italians, their CR-42 fighters they're not great anyway, and when they're at half strength they're less than great. So you can combine them. I just say you can combine them at the end of the naval and air phase if they're on the same air base. Don't see a problem with doing that. Similarly, the Russian I-16s, they've got, if you've got a flipped pair of I-16s taking up an air base spot, the rules as written is that half chit is the same as one chit for air base capacity. Just let them combine. You've got two halves, you know. When I was at school, two halves make one, so let them combine into one. Now the one then of course goes out the game. It's not put into the force pool, because that will allow you to get back additional aircraft, so it's just out the game. Similarly, you can split a full chit into two halves, and the reason you may want to do that occasionally is because you can ferry aircraft on aircraft carriers, but you can only ferry a half chit. So if, for example, as happened historically, the Allies are trying to maybe fly some Spitfires into Malta or something, they can reduce a full chit into half chit. The other half obviously has to be available, and it goes from the dead pile into the force pool, so you're always maintaining the same number of total aircraft. The reason why it doesn't stay on the map is that you've now got two halves on the map, and if you had a full strength identical counter in the force pool, the next season phase you could get rid of that and flip both of those two over to full strength, thereby gaining the additional air unit without having to wait for the one turn delay, because fighters have got typically a one turn delay, so that stops you from being a bit gamey and getting around that particular loophole if that rule wasn't in place. That's about it, I think. Everyone tweaks the game a little bit. There are things I just think they sort of make sense to me. I struggled for a long time with supply for naval units, and the rules just say they're in supply if they're in a supplied friendly port. Well, I know what a friendly port is. What is a supplied friendly port? Can't see it defined anywhere, and I suppose sort of initial thoughts were needs to trace back to a supply source, which is a home city resource X. But then that means that places like Malta are any submarines that are not in supply, so they can't do anything. And the submarines did do things, based in Malta, and many other examples of fleets being able to operate out of ports, but not necessarily on their home coastline. Anyway, there's 17,000 posts on Constant World, and on post number 2035 I found a confirmation email that actually it just meant a friendly port, not a friendly supplied port. And in fact, if you look at the old TSR game, which I have, the rules in there just say a friendly port. So the addition of that one extra word basically led to a massive post search on Constant World. So if anyone is struggling with that, I've probably just saved you a few hours of trawling through lots of posts on Constant. The only other thing I was going to say before showing a bit of the map was I was a bit concerned initially with the pilot recovery rule. When you get to replenish, not everyone does, but the Russians can replenish, I think it's 4 of their 4-3 infantry corps in Russian home territory. The Germans can rebuild a couple of their weaker, the 4-2 sort of militia units in Germany. You can also recover pilots during a monthly turn, so that's quite important for the German fighters that are stationed in Germany trying to take on the Allied bombers, because if they are damaged on a monthly turn in the replenishment phase, if you've got enough economic points and it costs you 4, you can flip them back so they're back at full strength, and you can do that each monthly turn, so you're getting stuff back on a monthly turn, not having to wait for the seasonal turn. And you also, those are also exempt from the wartime replacements, so you don't need to have the spare aircraft in your force pool. So that is a big bonus. Now, because I didn't play it very well, I don't think when I attacked Russia, the Russians committed their fighters to the defending Russian stacks where the bombers were, and the German fighters were escorting the bombers. So that's over a friendly hex, because the Russians are defending in their home territory, which means that you can do pilot recovery on those damaged fighters. So the Russian fighters just go for the German bombers. You're probably going to be hitting them on a 3 or 4 on a D6, so quite a good chance. The German fighters, they get an additional 1 on their strength for attacking a fighter which is going for a bomber, but that only really helps the flipped, these sort of depleted fighters, because they are already maxed out anyway. The 6 is a miss, a 5 is an abort, so you're typically going to get a hit on a 1, 2, 3 or 4. But what that means is that after that monthly turn, if the prudent Russian has kept some economic points in reserve, and you can keep 20 in your economic reserve, plus others if they haven't been reduced by strategic warfare. So if you had 20, you could essentially, during those 3 months, replace 3 or flip back 5 damaged Russian fighters. So maybe you flip back 2 or 3 on the first month, they then reappear on month 2, go for some more German bombers. Now, because all these bombers are subject to the wartime replacement. So I was thinking, what's going to happen to the German bomber force? It's just going to be wiped out. Is there a problem using pilot recovery with the wartime replacement rule? But I don't think there is, because if you played it better than I did, you would make sure you have got a large number of frontline airfields, and you can build a grass airfields during the monthly turns at the expenditure of one offensive and one economic point, and those grass airfields can accommodate a fighter or one fighter bomber. But you need to have your fighter or fighter bomber airfields forward, which means that when you attack the Russian defending hex, you've got an umbrella effectively of fighter escort that goes beyond that defending line. So when the Russian fighters try to intervene, you can intercept them before they get to the defending hex.